Speaking Human.
Today, on a very special episode of Speaking Human, we podcast our thoughts on the trials, travails, and triumphs of a topic very near and dear to our hearts: podcasting. That's right, humans. You're about to listen to a podcast about podcasts. Whoa!
Speaking Human.
Welcome to Speaking Human, the official podcast of Monsters Unlimited, a creative agency with a business brain. I'm Shad Conley, Communications Director at Monsters Unlimited, and a man with a mic, a podcast, and a dream.
And I'm Patrick Jebber, Creative Director at Monsters Unlimited, and a guy who just loves to speak into a microphone any chance he can get.
Very true. Very true. Before we get started today, we've got a couple quick announcements. First thing, we want to thank Loud and Clear, the Australian digital agency that produced the Kill Me 3 Times immersive experience we talked about last episode number 39. They gave us some nice Twitter love and tweeted out a link to our podcast, which was very cool. So that's always appreciated. You can find us on Twitter under the handle @ThinkMonsters.
Yeah, and we also wanted to give a quick shameless plug to our new podcast and videocast series, Visually and Verbally. You can find that on our website, thinkmonsters.com, or in the iTunes store. Please give it a watch or listen, and then leave us a review on iTunes. We'd love to hear your feedback.
Yeah, if you like Speaking Human, you'll love Visually and Verbally. Let's get back on track here, back to the business of the day, our 40th episode extravaganza. If this is your first time checking out the podcast, our goal on Speaking Human is to simplify complex marketing topics. We toss aside all the buzzwords and mumbo-jumbo to focus on how marketing can bring brands and people together. On today's episode, we mark the occasion of our 40th episode by talking about the communication vehicle that brought us here: podcasting. We're going to get personal by taking you behind the scenes of Speaking Human to provide some tips and insights for launching your own podcast. We're also going to field a few phone calls from our listeners, which should be interesting. So we got a lot of juicy ground to cover today, so let's get into it. Welcome to the Speaking Human podcast. This is the official podcast of Monsters Unlimited. I'm Shad Conley, and with me is
Patrick Jebber.
Just to give everyone a little background, since this is episode number 1, numero uno, I come from the copywriting side of things, so I'm the communication, the written word. That's sort of my background. Patrick, why don't you tell the folks a little bit about your background?
I am the creative director here at Monsters Unlimited, and I have a design background, branding, marketing, and interactive media.
So between the two of us, you just get it all. You get the writing, you get the design, you get the interactive. Our knowledge just is so vast and far-reaching. There's nothing we don't know something about. We'll just give you a little primer here on what we're trying to do, what our main goal and purpose is with the podcast. This is straightforward, human, laid-back talk about marketing. We're not looking at numbers or projections or anything like that. We're just talking about things on a human level, the connections they create, sort of how they hit you, gut reactions.
Sorry, I'm speechless. That was beautiful, man. That was
beautiful. Well, I practiced in the mirror for a podcast.
So here's how the show will go. All right, we kick off each week by sharing our views on some recent marketing news. Then we unleash the fury of our featured marketing review.
And what's this week's marketing review? Say it fast.
Well, this week, it's the Triscuit's new Topper Tantrum campaign. That's right, I said it. It's a tongue twister. So without further ado, let's get into it.
What you just heard was a clip from the very first episode of Speaking Human way back in August 2012, when we were just podcast neophytes. We've learned a lot about podcasting since our shaky debut, and we're going to share what we learned with you, lucky listener, on today's show. To get things rolling, Patrick, let's give the people out there some insight into the 3-year history of this podcast. If you can believe it's been 3 years and 40 episodes.
It's definitely felt like 3 years.
It's felt like an eternity in many ways. Going back, if you can remember all the way back to 2012, do you remember when we were launching this podcast? Why did we start this podcast? How we came up with the idea, what our plan was? Do you remember any of those things?
I think it started off like most podcasts. It was a way to showcase our expertise. We wanted to have fun with it. We wanted to focus on a topic that we have knowledge that we could share with others. And we wanted a format that we could have fun with, right? So
Yeah, and I think that was a lot of the fuel behind the whole idea, why we decided to do this was a lot of this was just kind of an extension of we have these conversations all the time, we're talking about these things, examining them and thinking about them, and it was a logical extension of that, taking those conversations and just putting them into a published format, right? We started out with an idea which was like a marketing news and doing marketing reviews too, almost like a Siskel and Ebert back and forth type thing. We bit off maybe a little more than we could chew at first. Would you agree with that?
Yeah. One of the things that we didn't really count on was how much time it takes, between prep, recording, editing, promoting. Just like any other marketing effort, it just takes time.
Yeah, there's a whole lot more to it than meets the eye, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
And it was one of those things at that point we were doing a weekly show where we were covering like 5 or 6 topics. And so like if you look at iTunes and see the history of the show, you'll just see the episodes gradually getting farther and farther apart.
Because, you have your regular life too, where you and your work.
We got jobs, man.
We have to do these marketing efforts for clients. So it's one of those things where we couldn't do that and do something that we were having fun and loved doing, but we just couldn't keep both of them on the priority list.
Yeah, but yet that love and, the passion for podcasting brought us back to it. What I consider sort of the rebirth of Speaking Human. We really sat down and looked at it and developed a strategy and said, all right, how can we do this and keep up with it and put a good product out?
Obviously, we love what we do and we love sharing the marketing initiatives out there that interest us. And we figured if it can help someone else, then it's all worth it for us, I think. But at the same time, we have fun creating the podcast, which makes it easier to spend the time on it.
Like anything, if you have that passion and excitement for it, it's shown through every time. So with that as a backdrop, let's talk about the good, the bad, and the ugly of this art form we call podcasting. For our listeners out there who maybe are thinking about getting into podcasting or starting a podcast for their company, something along those lines, let's start with the benefits. What are the benefits of doing a podcast? What do you like best about doing the podcast?
If you were asking me, which you often do in our podcast, which you are again, I'd say the main benefits of doing a podcast are, as a company, you can deliver content in a very popular medium. Podcasting is something that is growing in popularity. Oddly enough, it's been around for a very long time, but over the last few years, it's growing significantly in popularity. But it gives you the ability to showcase your company's leadership and the experts that lead it. So if you've got executives or technical guys in your company, talk about what it is that they do for your company. And it's a great way to give your company a voice. And for some businesses, that's a very foreign concept, but one that's very personal. Would you agree?
Yeah. That's the thing. It literally gives you a voice, which is one, easy to digest format for people. You can do other stuff and listen to a podcast, which you can't necessarily do when you're reading an article or blog or watching a video, right? And then the fact that it puts you out there, it adds more personality, more in-depth with things, and which for a lot of people, who have difficulty putting thoughts or ideas into writing, but they can talk for hours. Another side thing that I think we have found that was surprising to me, a couple of little side benefits to podcasting is, one, doing this podcast has made us analyze and think about things more so maybe than we would, or look at things that we wouldn't have looked at, and then that inspires us to use those ideas within our profession.
Yeah.
We'll talk about things and be like, oh, that's a good idea. It's a bit of brainstorming for us along with presenting this information, right?
Yeah. In a podcast prep, you do a little bit more research. You figure out what are the intricate details of that campaign, and then you talk about it. What could have been better about that? What did we like about it? And then how can that translate into other businesses? And all of that back and forth, it gives us the ability to go deeper, like you said. And that then translates into, just like you said, our professional lives and how we handle things differently because of the podcast.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's also, podcasting has become a key piece of our online content marketing strategy. A lot of the content we produce, even in videos or in blog format, are things inspired by the podcast or taken from the podcast. So it's all connected in that way. And it's really helped us bulk up our online content.
It becomes almost like the central hub of everything else, right?
Yeah, the centerpiece of what we do in terms of the informative content we give people. I'd say Speaking Human is right at the center of it. Let's talk about some of the challenges and hurdles that you might face when you start a podcast, some of the ones we ran into over the course of our 40 episodes. So you want to hit on a couple of those?
Honestly, the biggest challenge I think we've run into over the course of our podcasting history, time constraints. It's just like any other marketing initiative in that, on a priority level, you just have to set the time aside. Just like anything else, it can fall by the wayside if you don't devote the time to it. Our hiatus came about because it required more time than we were able to devote to it. And
we were getting crushed by time.
And, we were very aggressive in what we were trying to accomplish, but at the same time, you have to be realistic. And so our biggest challenge was time constraints mostly. And then, over the course of that time, we also found some technical things that we could do better that made it a little bit more efficient for us. Again, it couples with the time constraints. Being more efficient allowed us to prep faster and edit faster and all that. So.
Yeah, definitely the number one on my list, just from the writing to recording to production to editing to prepping the podcast for iTunes to promoting it. I mean, all that adds up to so much more time than you would think. If you're starting one up now, I would take into account all those aspects ahead of time. What I have attached to that, too, the other challenge is consistency. Getting it out there on a regular basis, which is important to developing a listener base, letting people know when they can expect it. Find that balance. How can I get this out there at a regular frequency every, weekly, monthly, daily, whatever you're trying to do. And that was obviously a big challenge with us related to time. The final one is format. It took us a while to just nail that format down that worked for us, like you talked about. We just had a more ambitious scope in the beginning. It takes a while to get that down. You can only really accomplish that through practice.
I agree. It's just like anything else. Experience makes you better at everything. And all of those things, we started off, we were very ambitious, and then we just had to be real with ourselves and say, that sounds great, but how do we actually get that done and still have fun with it in a format that we feel like it's worthwhile for not just us, but our listeners?
Yeah, and that's another thing you'll figure out as you go. What are your listeners like? Which you can even find out directly from them. Are we presenting this in a way that's as interesting, entertaining, and informative as it could be to them? Or are we just, doing something more for ourselves? So you always got to keep the listener in mind, too. With those challenges laid out, what are some tips you would give to a person, an individual, or a company just starting a podcast?
From the sounds of what we've been saying so far, I'd say, don't do it. It's a giant mistake, one you can never undo.
Get out now.
I'm just kidding. I would say tip number one would be pick a topic that interests you or that you're highly skilled in, whether it's you or your company. And, obviously there's decision makers in that. And then tip number two would be, like we were talking about, be realistic. Don't bite off more than you can chew. Seriously. It's very easy to do. We all have ambitions. We can tend to be over ambitious. So just be realistic with yourself, and whatever you decide on, scale it back a little bit, or over time, you'll be doing it naturally anyway.
A good way to figure that out ahead of time is to do some trial runs.
Mm-hmm.
Put together what you think your format's going to be, and then have, say, 3 episodes, do a few trial runs, see what works, what doesn't, see what the workload's like, the time involved, and that'll give you a better idea before you commit to it and put it out into the world.
Yeah, a great example is, when we started Visually and Verbally, on the fly while we were recording our first couple episodes, right, Shad? We were editing intros and outros while we were recording because we realized, this would be a little bit better if we did this.
And that gave us the ability to create a better product before we introduced it to iTunes and put it out on the web. Some other things, equipment can make a big difference. The audio quality, if you're going to do a long-term podcast, people don't want to listen to a crappy sounding podcast. Something that's not appealing to the ears lessens your chances of getting listened to and developing that listener base.
Yeah, equipment, just like anything else in your professional lives, it's important. It's an important piece to the puzzle to do your work better, to be more efficient, to be more productive, all that.
Something you don't necessarily think about when you're listening to podcasts is the editing work involved. Not every show we do flows perfectly smooth like you're going to hear this one in the end. There's audio things that go wrong. Sometimes we say really stupid things. Stuff like that. You have to be prepared for that time in the editing room, which can be longer than you might think.
Yeah. It's one of those things where some episodes there's very little editing, and then others it's like a movie. The editing can be the difference between a really great movie or one that you're like, man, they could have really cut about a half an hour out of that movie and it would have been still a great movie and much better. I wouldn't have been bored out of my mind that other half an hour. And so, yeah, editing is definitely one of those big ones.
Last thing that might be useful to people is, what software do you use to edit the podcast?
We use Adobe for our design and for marketing. So we started using Adobe Audition, and then we take that into Media Encoder for different formats that we need to export into.
I think that's valuable for people out there.
I say think of a podcast like your favorite television show or radio DJs. People like regularity. So if you are sporadic or you fall off the face of the earth, you run the risk of losing listeners or viewers. So I would just say, try to be consistent and record regularly.
Yeah, and that's on my list too. And I think the most common you'll see are weekly or bi-weekly, every 2 weeks. You'll see some dailies, which is very ambitious, and some monthly. I wouldn't go any farther than monthly, otherwise you're just off the radar.
It's like anything else, out of sight, out of mind, right?
Yeah. And I would say a few other things that I'll just hit on real quick. You can research online, like prepping your podcast. For example, there's a lot you have to do to get your podcast iTunes ready. So that's a good thing to look up. You'll want to find out, all the descriptions and how you present your podcast in iTunes can make a big difference to the listeners you get. The other thing is, it's not a if you build it, they will come situation. You have to, like your blog, like anything else, you have to promote to build that listener base. It's not just going to be like you post your podcast and all of a sudden you have 5 million listeners. You have to get them to come to your website and download and listen. A constant work you have to put into the podcast as well. And to underline your first point again, make sure you're passionate about your topic. Make sure you have fun with it. The listener will pick up on those things.
Yes, passion.
So what's your number one takeaway for a person or a company looking to dip their toes into the podcasting waters?
Like I said earlier, podcasting is a great way to give your brand a voice, but you'll need to think of it as an investment that pays back over time. It's not the type of investment that sees immediate returns, but it follows the same rules as most marketing. Anybody who does advertising knows that consistency is key. Exposure over time and with the right message and focus to the right audience can deliver results. And that is the key takeaway for me. It takes time, and you can't get away from that.
No doubt. Well said. My top takeaway is a culmination of everything we've been talking about, and that's just, go in with a plan. Check off all the boxes and make sure you have a strategy in place for being able to publish a podcast and consistently do so, and keep it up and present a quality product. Develop and test your format. Have a recording and publishing schedule. Have topics prepared for the first 4 to 5 episodes so you can practice run those. Know what you have to do to get your podcast in iTunes or Stitcher or other places you want to present it. Create your website where you're going to house your podcast. Account for editing and production time. All these things part of your plan, and you need to just go down that checklist and you'll be excited. You'll want to just do the podcast and get it out there, but better if you come in with a strategy. It'll be better for your podcast in the long term.
You hit like everything all in one paragraph, and I love that.
It's just real fast and crazy, right?
Yes.
So you didn't even need to listen to the podcast. You could just listen to that little
Everybody just listen to that one snippet, and you have the entire podcast.
All right, so I think that about wraps it up on podcasting, don't you think, Patrick?
Yeah. Usually at this point, this is where we wrap up the show, but not today, humans. In celebration of our 40th episode, we're going to play some voicemails we received from listeners and answer their questions. This is the first time we've ever done this on the podcast, so let's see how it goes. We'll play the first message and go from there.
Yeah, cue it up.
Hi, it's me, Chris, Walken. I love listening to Speaking Human. I have a question, though. When you talked about my commercial on episode number 17, you never mentioned that I once worked as a lion tamer. Why?
Well, I think that was the actor Christopher Walken.
Wow, Chris Walken called in.
That's crazy, right? In answer to your question, Christopher, I don't know the answer to that question. Patrick, you want to field that one?
Well, Chris, we try to cover everything in our podcast episodes, but, sometimes some things slip through the cracks. You as a lion tamer, to be honest with you, I didn't even know that, but that is an amazing, amazing accomplishment in life. I don't know. Congratulations.
Yeah, kudos to you, sir. Yes.
Yeah, it's really nice.
Should we move on to the next voicemail?
Jeff Goldblum here. You discussed my role as Terry Quattro in GE's Enhance Your Lighting video on episode 30 of Speaking Human. Problem is, I am neither human nor do I speak it. Please explain.
Jeff Goldblum wants to know, well, he's basically telling us he's not a human being. I don't really know if there's a question there that's answerable by us.
Maybe if you go back to any one of your movies, maybe like The Fly, they had some.
Yeah, I'd watch The Fly. The answer's in there. Yeah. I can't believe it. 2 celebrities in a row. I'm just excited to see who this next one's going to be.
Yeah, we're getting a lot of high-profile celebrities.
Very unexpected. Let's play the next voicemail.
This is Arnold Schwarzenegger, star of Commando and Conan the Destroyer. You talked about my work in the marketing campaign for realestate.com.au on episode number 24 of Speaking Human. I did not give you permission to utter my name from your lips, and I'm going to kill you both.
Wow, that was very threatening. Arnold Schwarzenegger, former governor of California, an action star, promising to murder us both. Unexpected.
Arnold, you're a hero. You're a staple of action movies. And you were the former governor of California. You can't say those kinds of things to us. We're very sorry.
Yeah, and we really liked his realestate.com.au work. We thought it was great. Thought he was funny, just like he is in Twins. We love the movie Predator. So take us off your death list,
please.
Arnie.
We would love to have you in, though, as a celebrity host or celebrity.
Oh, yeah, you're welcome on the show anytime.
Yeah,
anytime.
Please. Yeah, I think we have one more message that came in, so let's play that.
Hello, this is Otto Traitor from the secret Easter egg of episode number 21 of The Speaking Human. I just wanted to congratulate you guys on your 40th episode. Improve it. You don't want to be stuck in my trunk of my car. Because if you don't improve, that is what is going to happen. I'm going to come get you, put you in the trunk of my car. It won't be fun for you. Nobody wants this. Improve it.
Wow, a phone message from Auto Trader, who, is not even a real person. Him popping up again is really, really surprising. We need to check our voicemail far more often. Would have been great to talk to them in person, but I guess then we wouldn't have these voicemails, these amazingly authentic voicemails to play on the air, right?
We should work on being able to talk to them in person. Maybe we could even invite them back.
I'm sure sometime in the next 40 episodes, their voices will pop up on the podcast again.
Yeah. All right, everyone. Guess that's it for today's episode, number 40. You can find current and past episodes of the podcast at speakinghuman.com. You can also subscribe, rate, and review the Speaking Human podcast in the iTunes store. Totally appreciate that.
In iTunes, you can find all 40 of these episodes going back to the beginning episode we played you a clip of earlier, going back to number 1 in 2012. You can find them all. Marathon that this weekend. Email us with your personal podcasting lessons or tips, or any questions or comments. Feedback at thinkmonsters.com. We'll be back in 2 weeks with the first of our next 40 episodes of Speaking Human. Catch you then, humans.
Speaking Human.
This is the worst show I've ever been on. I don't know why they keep doing it.
I don't even know what a podcast is.
I don't know why you guys don't know what is happening here. This is a podcast.
Ani, it's me, Ani. What are you doing on this podcast? You're so much better than this.
I just like to scream all the time. It is what I do. If you don't like it, get out of the way. I just want to break in, okay? Because you guys is totally driving me crazy, okay? Look, all I care about is one thing. And this is your car buying experience the best it can be? Like in my realestate.com.au.
Now you're speaking my language.
What is going on? Nobody is actually making any sense. I'm out of here.